Aiden Carter opened the front door just wide enough to let the night air in and his pregnant wife out. Amber Hayes stood on the polished steps of their Irvine home, one hand resting on her stomach while his new lover remained behind him in warm light, already occupying her place. No raised voices, no hesitation, just a quiet removal witnessed through half-lit windows by neighbors who chose stillness over intervention. Amber didn't argue. She stepped forward carrying more than what anyone could see. Somewhere in her coat pocket, an unread email waited, one that would make this moment look very different in time. If you believe silence doesn't mean weakness, stay with this story. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and your local time, and if stories like this matter to you. Consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. Amber Hayes had always understood the value of restraint long before anyone mistook it for weakness. At 32, she lived in a world built on numbers patterns and quiet observations. Her work as an independent financial consultant allowed her to operate mostly from home, reviewing portfolios, advising small clients, and occasionally assisting boutique firms that needed discretion more than visibility. She was not the kind of person who filled a room with presence. She did not need to. She noticed what others overlooked, and she remembered what others dismissed. There were notebooks, not one but several. Thin, unassuming journals lined the inside drawer of her desk, each labeled with nothing more than dates. Inside them, Amber recorded things most people would never think to write down. Transactions, conversations, behavioral shifts. The way a tone changed halfway through a sentence. The exact wording of a request that seemed casual but carried weight. She had never explained this habit to anyone, not even to her husband, because it had never seemed necessary. It was simply how she processed the world. Aiden Carter, her husband of 6 years, had once found it charming. In the early days of their marriage, when his construction business was still struggling to secure stable contracts, he used to joke that Amber could probably predict the stock market if she paid enough attention. He admired her patience then, her calm, her ability to sit with uncertainty without forcing it to resolve too quickly. Back then, he still listened when she spoke. Aiden was 38 now, and success had reshaped him in ways that were subtle at first, then increasingly difficult to ignore. His company, Carter Development Solutions, had grown from a small operation handling residential renovations into a mid-sized firm bidding on commercial projects across Southern California. The growth had not been accidental. Amber had played a role quietly reviewing financial structures, advising on risk exposure, helping him avoid contracts that looked profitable on paper but carried hidden liabilities. She never asked for credit. He never offered it. The shift did not happen overnight. It began with longer work hours, which made sense. Then came the closed-door phone calls, which she initially attributed to client confidentiality. After that, there were changes that had nothing to do with business. Aiden stopped leaving documents in shared spaces. He started using passwords on devices he had never protected before. He began to speak in conclusions rather than discussions. "I've already handled it," became a common phrase. Amber did not challenge it. Not immediately. She adjusted the way she always did by watching. The house they lived in, a modern 2-story property in Irvine, with glass-paneled doors and carefully maintained landscaping, had once felt like a shared achievement. Now it felt increasingly like a space divided by invisible lines. Aiden occupied the center. Amber moved along the edges. That morning, a week before the night everything would fracture, Amber sat at the dining table with her laptop open, reviewing a small client's retirement portfolio. The sunlight filtered through the tall windows, illuminating dust particles that moved slowly in the air, almost suspended. Her phone vibrated once. Unknown number. She let it ring twice before answering. Amber Hayes. The voice on the other end was measured professional. "Yes, my name is Michael Reeves. I'm calling from Reeves & Cole, based in New York. I've been trying to reach you regarding an estate matter." Amber did not respond immediately. Her fingers stilled over the keyboard. "What kind of estate matter?" she asked. There was a pause, not hesitation, but precision. "It concerns a recent transfer of assets in which you have been identified as the primary beneficiary. The matter is time-sensitive. We've sent documentation to your email, but we have not yet received a response." Amber's gaze shifted slightly, not toward anything in particular, but inward. "I see," she said. "We would strongly recommend that you review the documents at your earliest convenience," Michael Reeves continued. "There are decisions that may require your authorization." Amber glanced at the clock on the wall. 10:14 a.m. "I'll look into it," she replied. The call ended without urgency, but it did not feel unimportant. Her email icon showed a new message. Subject line: Urgent Estate Transfer Notification, Hayes. She did not open it. Instead, she closed her laptop, reached for one of her notebooks, and wrote 10:14 a.m. Call from Michael Reeves & Cole. Estate matter. Time sensitive. Email received. Not opened. She underlined the last two words once. Not opened. It was not avoidance. It was timing. Amber had learned over years of careful observation that information carried more weight depending on when it was allowed into a situation. Opening that email would introduce variables. Variables required decisions. Decisions altered trajectories. And something, though she could not yet define it, suggested that the trajectory she was currently on had not fully revealed itself. Later that evening, Aiden returned home later than usual. The sound of his car pulling into the driveway was followed by a brief pause before the front door opened. Amber was in the kitchen preparing a simple dinner she knew he might not eat. "You're still up," he said, more as a statement than a question. "I was working," she replied. He set his keys down on the counter without looking at her. There was a faint scent of cologne, one she did not recognize. "I already ate," he added. Amber nodded once. She did not ask where. There had been a time when she would have, not out of suspicion, but out of routine. That time had passed quietly without a clear moment of ending. "How was your day?" she asked, the question placed carefully, like something being tested rather than offered. "Busy," he said. "A lot of moving parts." He did not elaborate. Amber turned off the stove. The silence that followed was not empty. It was structured, filled with things neither of them chose to say. Aiden checked his phone. His expression shifted slightly, something brief, almost imperceptible. Then he typed a response. Amber noticed. She always noticed. "Did anything come in for me?" he asked suddenly. "No," she said. Another pause. "I'm restructuring a few things," he continued, still looking at his phone. "Financially. It might involve moving some assets around. Nothing you need to worry about." Amber watched him for a moment longer than usual. "What kind of restructuring?" she asked. He looked up then, not sharply, but with a trace of impatience. "Just business," he said. "I've got it under control." Amber nodded again. "I know," she said. It was not agreement. It was acknowledgement. Later that night, after Aiden had gone to bed, Amber remained at the dining table. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made small sounds like the turning of a page or the tapping of a pen feel amplified. She opened her laptop. The email was still there, unread. For a moment, her cursor hovered over it. Then she moved it away. Instead, she opened a separate document and began to list recent financial changes she had observed in Aiden's behavior. Increased withdrawals, new accounts, shifts in payment patterns that did not align with the company's reported growth. She cross-referenced dates, times, amounts. Her pen moved steadily across the notebook beside her. There was no visible emotion in her expression. No urgency, no fear, only attention. Somewhere upstairs, Aiden slept with the certainty of someone who believed he understood the direction of his life. Downstairs, Amber continued to document a reality that had not yet been fully revealed. The email remained unopened. For now, change rarely announced itself in Aiden Carter's life. It settled in gradually disguised as necessity, ambition, or progress until it became something that could no longer be mistaken for coincidence. Amber Hayes noticed the pattern before she named it. It began with time. Aiden's schedule, once predictable in its unpredictability, started to shift into something more controlled. His late returns were no longer sporadic, but consistent. Mondays, Wednesdays, and increasingly Fridays. The reasons he gave remained plausible: client dinners, site inspections, last-minute negotiations, but the structure behind them was too precise to be random. Amber did not question the explanations. She recorded the rhythm. In her notebook, the entries were simple. Monday, home 10:42 p.m. Wednesday, home 11:08 p.m. Friday, no return until after midnight. She did not assign meaning immediately. She allowed the pattern to repeat. The second shift came through absence. Aiden began to remove himself from shared routines that had once required no effort. Morning coffee, once a quiet overlap between them, disappeared first. He started leaving before she woke, his side of the bed already cool when Amber reached across in the early hours. Meals followed. He stopped asking what she had planned for dinner. He stopped noticing whether she had eaten at all. The kitchen, once a shared space of small conversations and overlapping presence, became something Amber occupied alone. Still, she did not confront him. Instead, she adjusted her observation. The third shift arrived through objects. Receipts appeared in places they had never appeared before. Creased slips left in jacket pockets, tucked between car seat seams, forgotten on the edge of the kitchen counter. Amber did not search for them. She found them in the ordinary process of maintaining a home that Aiden no longer seemed to fully inhabit. A restaurant in Newport Beach, a boutique cafe in Laguna, a wine bar she knew Aiden had once dismissed as too curated. The timestamps did not align with his explanations. Amber did not comment on the discrepancy. She photographed the receipts with her phone, cataloged them by date, and uploaded them into a private folder she had created months earlier, long before she had fully understood why she might need it. She labeled each file with a system that required no interpretation. 2024-03-receipt_21 18_Newport Beach 2024-03-receipt_1947 Laguna or facts, not conclusions. By the time the name entered the pattern, Amber already knew there was a presence she had not yet seen. Sophie Lang did not arrive as an announcement. She appeared as a repetition. A name on Aiden's phone screen, briefly visible when it lit up on the kitchen counter. A message preview that disappeared before it could be fully read. A contact saved without a last name at first, then later updated. Amber noticed the progression. Soph became Sophie L. It was not the name itself that mattered. It was the frequency. The messages came during the same hours Aiden had begun to withdraw. Late afternoons, evenings, just before he claimed he needed to leave again. Amber did not open his phone. She did not need to. The pattern was already complete. One evening, while Aiden was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. Amber passed by the open door without pausing, but the sound, two quick vibrations, registered. When Aiden emerged minutes later, he checked the phone immediately. His expression shifted again, subtle, contained, but present. The same shift she had seen days earlier. Amber filed it away. The fourth shift was behavioral. Aiden began to speak differently, not louder, not more aggressive, just more certain. He no longer asked Amber for input on business decisions he once would have discussed in detail. Contracts were signed without review. Financial structures were adjusted without explanation. When she attempted to ask clarifying questions, his responses came shorter, sharper. "I've already taken care of it. It's handled. You don't need to get involved." Amber did not argue. But she did not stop listening. Instead, she changed the way she documented. Her notebook entries evolved. 0314 Aiden references new contract. No documentation shared. Tone dismissive when asked. 0316 phone activity increased between 5-8 p.m. Contact Sophie L. Pattern consistent. 0318 financial account transfer approx. $18,000. No prior discussion. She did not speculate. She did not accuse. She built a record. The first time she saw Sophie in person was not through confrontation. It was through reflection. Aiden had left his car keys on the kitchen counter, something he rarely did. Amber needed to move the car slightly to make space for a delivery truck arriving later that afternoon. She took the keys without hesitation. The interior of the car carried a scent that did not belong to either of them. Amber noticed it immediately. Not because it was strong, but because it was deliberate, something chosen applied with intention. A light floral note layered over something sharper. She adjusted the seat, then caught sight of something in the passenger side mirror. A smudge. Not random. A partial imprint, as if someone had leaned in close enough for their reflection to distort the surface. There was also a strand of hair, long dark, not her own. Amber did not react. She reached into her bag, took out her phone, and captured a single image. Then she started the car, moved it as needed, and returned inside. That evening, she added a new entry, 0321. Physical evidence in vehicle. Female presence confirmed. No confrontation. The confirmation did not bring clarity. It brought alignment. Everything she had observed now connected to something tangible. But Amber still did not speak. There was a moment late that night when Aiden sat across from her at the dining table. It was one of the few times he had been home before midnight that week. His phone remained face down beside his plate, though he checked it frequently. Amber studied him in silence. There was nothing outwardly different about him. The same posture, the same controlled movements, the same voice. But the attention he once directed toward her had shifted entirely elsewhere. "You've been quiet," he said, finally, not looking up. Amber considered the statement. "I've been working," she replied. He nodded as if that explanation required no further exploration. Another pause. "You don't need to take on so much," he added. "I've got things covered now." Amber's gaze remained steady. "I know," she said again. The words carried the same tone as before. Acknowledgement without agreement. Aiden leaned back slightly as though satisfied with the exchange. To him, the conversation had ended. To Amber, it had revealed something else. He no longer saw her as a variable. Later, after he had gone upstairs, Amber returned to her desk. She opened the folder on her laptop. Receipts, images, notes, timelines. Everything aligned with increasing precision. Then, for the first time, she created a new document. She titled it simply, Aiden Timeline. There was no emotion in the act, no visible anger, no urgency, only structure. She began to transfer her handwritten notes into digital form, organizing them chronologically and cross-referencing each entry with supporting evidence. Dates connected to transactions, transactions connected to locations, locations connected to time gaps connected to communication patterns. And within those patterns, one name appeared consistently. Sophie Lang. Amber did not attempt to learn more about her. Not yet. That would come later if it was necessary. For now, it was enough to understand the shape of what was happening. Upstairs, Aiden slept again, with the ease of someone who believed his actions existed without consequence. Downstairs, Amber continued to build a record that would not rely on memory. The email from Reeves and Cole remained unopened, but the space around it was changing. And when Amber finally chose to open it, it would not enter an empty situation. It would enter something already mapped. Public spaces had a way of clarifying private truths without ever naming them. The invitation arrived 3 days later, printed on heavy cardstock with a minimalist design that reflected the kind of event Aiden had recently begun to favor. It was a small networking gathering hosted by one of his new business partners, held at a boutique rooftop venue overlooking the coastline in Newport Beach. The guest list, as Aiden described it in passing, would be select. He left the card on the kitchen counter without comment, as though its presence alone was sufficient communication. Amber found it later that afternoon while clearing the space. She read it once, then set it back exactly where it had been. There was no direct invitation addressed to her. That detail did not go unnoticed. When Aiden returned home that evening, he changed into a tailored navy suit without asking if she planned to attend. His movements were efficient, deliberate. He checked his reflection in the hallway mirror, adjusted his cuff, then reached for his phone. "You heading out?" Amber asked from the dining table, her voice even. "Yeah," he said. "It's just a quick thing." A pause followed, brief but measurable. "You don't need to come," he added, almost as an afterthought. "It's mostly business." Amber nodded once. "I understand." She did not ask for clarification. She did not ask who would be there. Aiden left without looking back. The house settled into silence again. Amber remained seated for several minutes after the door closed, her hands resting lightly on the surface of the table. The late afternoon light shifted slowly across the floor, stretching shadows into longer shapes. Then she stood. Her movements were unhurried. She walked upstairs, opened her closet, and selected a dress she had not worn in months. It was simple, soft ivory, structured but understated. The kind of piece that did not demand attention but held it once noticed. She did not rush her preparation. Every action followed the same quiet precision that defined everything she did. When she arrived at the venue, the sky had already begun its transition into evening. The rooftop space was framed by glass railings, offering an uninterrupted view of the ocean below. Conversations floated in controlled tones, punctuated by occasional laughter that felt practiced rather than spontaneous. Amber stepped into the space without announcement. No one stopped her. She moved through the room with a calm that made her presence difficult to categorize. She was neither out of place nor entirely expected. Just another figure within a carefully curated environment. It did not take long to find Aiden. He stood near the center of the gathering, his posture relaxed in a way Amber recognized as intentional. Confidence performed just enough to be noticed. Beside him stood a woman Amber had never formally met but already knew. Sophie Lang. In person, she carried the same deliberate presence Amber had inferred from patterns. Late 20s? Composed. Attentive in a way that suggested calculation rather than curiosity. Her hand rested lightly on Aiden's arm as she listened to him speak, her expression tuned precisely to his tone. They looked aligned, not just physically but in timing, in rhythm. Amber observed them for a moment before moving closer. Aiden saw her before Sophie did. The shift in his expression was immediate, though subtle. Not surprise exactly, but something close to interruption. As if a sequence he had already arranged had been altered without warning. Amber. He said the name, landing somewhere between acknowledgement and question. Sophie turned, then her gaze settling on Amber, with a brief flicker of assessment. "This is Sophie," Aiden added, his tone smoothing over the moment. "She's been helping with some of our marketing strategies." Amber met Sophie's gaze without hesitation. Amber Hayes, she said, offering her name without elaboration. Sophie smiled, polite, contained. I've heard a lot about you, she said. Amber held the statement for a fraction longer than necessary. I see, she replied. The conversation around them continued, but something within their immediate space shifted. Not tension, not conflict, just awareness. Aiden cleared his throat lightly. We were just discussing a new project, he said. There are a few potential investors here. Amber nodded her attention, moving briefly across the room. Looks like a well-organized event, she said. It was a neutral observation. It carried no judgment, but it created distance. Sophie's hand remained on Aiden's arm. That detail did not change. A man approached, then mid-40s, confident, carrying the easy authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. Aiden turned toward him immediately, engaging with an energy that felt slightly heightened, as though compensating for something unspoken. Amber stepped back. Not away, but out of the center. She moved toward the edge of the gathering, where the glass railing met the open view of the ocean. The air was cooler there, less saturated with conversation. From that position, she could see everything. Aiden's movements, Sophie's proximity, the way introductions were made without including her, the way Sophie occupied space beside him as though it had already been assigned. Amber did not intervene. She did not approach again. Instead, she observed. A woman standing nearby glanced at her briefly, then away. There was recognition in the glance, not of Amber herself, but of the situation. The kind of silent acknowledgement that existed in public spaces where boundaries were being crossed without formal declaration. Amber returned the glance with the same neutrality she offered everything else. Time moved without urgency. At some point, a server passed by with a tray of champagne. Amber took a glass more out of alignment with the environment than desire. She held it without drinking. Across the room, Aiden laughed at something someone said. Sophie leaned in slightly, her expression mirroring his. They looked like a unit. Amber turned her gaze back toward the ocean. The horizon line remained steady, unaffected by anything happening behind her. Her phone vibrated once in her clutch. She did not check it immediately. When she did minutes later, the screen displayed a new message. Reeves and Cole final notice response required. The subject line was more direct than before. Amber read it without opening the email. Then she locked the screen and returned the phone to her bag. Behind her, the event continued. Conversations layered over one another, forming a structure that appeared stable from the outside. But Amber had already identified the fractures. When Aiden finally approached her again, it was with a tone that suggested control rather than concern. You didn't have to come, he said quietly. Amber met his gaze. I know, she replied. Another pause. You should probably head back, he added. It's getting late. Amber considered the statement. Not the words themselves, but the intention behind them. Then she nodded. All right, she said. There was no argument, no resistance. She placed the untouched glass of champagne on a nearby table and moved toward the exit without looking back. No one stopped her. No one called her name. And Aiden did not follow. The night air outside was cooler, clearer. Amber walked to her car with the same measured pace she carried everywhere. Inside, she sat for a moment before starting the engine. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel. The phone remained in her bag, the email still unopened. But something had shifted, not in the situation itself. That had already been in motion. What changed was her position within it. For the first time, the pattern was no longer forming. It was complete enough to act on. Amber started the car and drove home. Documents rarely revealed their intent at first glance. They relied on tone formatting and familiarity to pass unnoticed. Amber Hayes understood that better than most. The folder appeared on the dining table 2 mornings after the rooftop event. It had been placed there deliberately, aligned with the edge of the table, its contents neatly squared, as though presentation alone could establish legitimacy. Aiden stood nearby, already dressed for the day, his expression composed in a way that suggested the conversation had been rehearsed. "I need you to look over something," he said. Amber approached without hurry. She took a seat, pulled the folder toward her, and opened it with steady hands. Inside were several pages legal forms typed and structured with the kind of language that relied on precision to conceal intention. The header referenced a restructuring of jointly held assets. The phrasing was neutral, efficient, designed to sound procedural. Amber began to read. She did not skim. Every line was processed not just for meaning, but for implication. Clauses referencing property ownership, adjustments to account authority, transfers framed as temporary reallocations. Each section connected to another, forming a structure that, when viewed in isolation, appeared reasonable. When viewed together, it suggested something else, a shift in control. Aiden remained standing, watching her. Not closely, but with enough attention to measure time. "It's just a formality," he added after a moment. "We're reorganizing things on the business side. Cleaner structure, less exposure." Amber turned a page. "Which assets does this involve?" she asked, her tone even. "Mostly the house," he said. "A few accounts. It's standard. Standard." The word carried weight not because of what it meant, but because of how often it was used to discourage deeper examination. Amber continued reading. The language regarding the house was precise. Transfer of primary ownership from joint to singular Aiden Carter. The justification, liability, protection, tax efficiency, operational clarity. She paused there, her finger resting lightly against the margin. "And this protects the business?" she asked. "Exactly," Aiden said. "If anything ever comes up legally, it keeps things separated." Amber nodded slowly. The explanation was plausible. But the structure beneath it was not neutral. She moved to the next section. Bank accounts. Joint accounts being converted into individually managed funds under Aiden's authority. Access permissions adjusted. Withdrawal limits redefined. Her gaze did not change. "And these accounts?" she asked. "Same idea," he replied. "It's easier if everything runs through one channel. Easier." Amber noted the word. She turned another page. A clause near the end referenced authorization under voluntary consent. It included language confirming that all parties understood the nature of the transfer and agreed without coercion. Amber read that section twice. Then she closed the folder gently. Aiden shifted his weight slightly, as though expecting a response. "It's a lot to go through," Amber said. "It's straightforward," he replied. "We've already reviewed it with legal." Amber met his gaze. "Which legal team?" she asked. Aiden hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Internal," he said. "One of our advisors." Amber nodded once. "I'd like some time to review it," she said. Aiden's expression remained controlled, but something tightened at the edges. "There's a timeline," he said. "We need to finalize this soon." Amber rested her hand on the closed folder. "I understand," she replied. The conversation paused there. Not resolved, but suspended. Aiden picked up his keys. "Just don't overthink it," he added. "It's routine." Amber did not respond. She watched him leave, the sound of the front door closing, echoing briefly through the house before settling into quiet. The folder remained on the table. Amber sat with it for several minutes before reopening it. This time, she approached it differently. Not as a document to read, but as a structure to map. She took out her notebook and began to list each clause in simplified terms. Ownership transfer, account control, authorization language, cross-references between sections. Each item was reduced to its core function. Then she drew lines between them. The pattern emerged quickly. This was not a neutral restructuring. It was a consolidation, control moving in one direction, from shared to singular, from Amber to Aiden. She did not react emotionally to the realization. Instead, she reached for her phone. One by one, she photographed each page of the document, ensuring clarity, adjusting angles to capture every detail. Once complete, she uploaded the images to her private cloud folder, organizing them under a new category: legal asset transfer. She labeled each file with precision: doc_01_property transfer, doc_02_account control, doc_03_authorization clause. Then she returned to the table and reassembled the folder exactly as she had found it. Nothing appeared altered. That afternoon, Amber opened her laptop and began cross-referencing the document with existing financial records she had already collected. The account numbers matched. The timing aligned. Recent withdrawals, previously noted in her timeline, connected directly to the accounts listed in the transfer forms. Funds had already begun moving smaller amounts, spaced out, structured in a way that avoided immediate detection. Amber added new entries to her digital document transfer pattern initiated prior to consent request. Account restructuring appears retroactive in intent. She did not draw conclusions beyond the evidence, but the structure spoke clearly. This was not preparation. It was continuation. Later that evening, Aiden returned home earlier than usual. Amber was in the living room, her notebook open, though her pen remained still. "Did you look at the documents?" he asked. "Yes," she said, and he prompted. Amber closed the notebook gently. "I need a little more time," she replied. Aiden exhaled through his nose, not quite a sigh. "There isn't much to think about," he said. "It's already been reviewed." Amber held his gaze. "I prefer to understand everything before I sign," she said. The room shifted slightly, not in volume but in tension. Aiden stepped closer, his tone sharpening just enough to register. "You're making this more complicated than it is," he said. Amber did not move. "I don't think so," she replied. A pause. Then Aiden's expression smoothed again, the edge receding as quickly as it had appeared. "Just don't drag it out," he said. "We need this done." Amber nodded once. "I hear you." The conversation ended there, but something beneath it remained active. That night, after Aiden went upstairs, Amber returned to the dining table. She opened her laptop. The email from Reeves and Cole still sat unopened. Its subject line remained unchanged: final notice response required. Amber studied it for a moment longer than before, not because she was uncertain, but because she understood that opening it would shift the balance of information. And once that balance shifted, the decisions would follow. She reached for her pen instead. In her notebook, she wrote, "Documents presented. Control transfer attempt confirmed. Evidence secured." She underlined the last phrase twice. Then she added one more line beneath it, email still unopened. Amber closed the notebook. The house remained quiet. Upstairs, Aiden moved through his routine with the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. Downstairs, Amber sat with a complete picture that had not yet been revealed to anyone else. The folder on the table waited. The email remained unopened. But the distance between those two things was narrowing, and when they met, the structure Aiden believed he controlled would no longer hold. Hospitals had a way of stripping everything down to essentials. Amber Hayes arrived 10 minutes early for her prenatal appointment, the automatic glass doors sliding open with quiet precision as she stepped inside. The lobby was bright, almost excessively so, with polished floors reflecting overhead lights in clean, uninterrupted lines. It was the kind of environment designed to reassure through clarity, through order. Amber moved through it without hesitation. Check-in was brief. A clipboard, a signature, a routine set of questions she had already answered before. When asked if someone was accompanying her, she simply said no. There was no elaboration required. She took a seat near the far end of the waiting area, where the flow of movement slowed and conversations became less audible. Around her, other women sat with partners, family members, or friends. Quiet exchanges, reassurances, shared anticipation. Amber observed them without comparison. Her phone rested in her hand screen dark. A notification icon remained in the corner. Unread. The same email thread from Reeves and Cole had expanded. Additional messages layered beneath the original, each subject line growing more direct. Second notice. Pending authorization. Required reminder. Estate transfer deadline. Approaching final notice. Immediate attention needed. Amber had not opened any of them. Not yet. Amber Hayes. The nurse's voice cut gently through the room. Amber stood following her down a corridor lined with identical doors. The walls were neutral, the kind of color chosen to avoid drawing attention. Everything about the space was structured to minimize uncertainty. Inside the examination room, Amber sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting lightly against the fabric of her dress. The paper lining beneath her shifted slightly, with the movement producing a soft, almost imperceptible sound. The doctor entered moments later. Dr. Elena Park had seen Amber twice before. She carried herself with a kind of attentiveness that did not require overt warmth to feel present. "How have you been feeling?" she asked, pulling up a stool. Amber considered the question. "Fine," she said. Dr. Park did not respond immediately. She reviewed the chart, her expression focused. "Any changes in sleep appetite?" she continued. Amber shook her head slightly. Nothing significant. The doctor looked up, then her gaze steady. "Stress levels?" she asked. Amber paused. It was not a difficult question, but it required definition. "Higher than usual," she said finally. Dr. Park nodded once, as though confirming something she had already suspected. "That's not uncommon," she said. "But it's something we need to monitor closely. Stress can affect both you and the baby, even if it doesn't feel immediate." Amber listened. "There are ways to manage it," the doctor continued. "Support systems adjustments to routine." "I understand," Amber said. Dr. Park studied her for a moment longer. "Are you getting support at home?" she asked. The question was simple. Amber's response was just as measured. No. There was no visible reaction from the doctor, just a small shift in posture, a recalibration of approach. "Then we'll need to be more intentional about how we handle this," Dr. Park said. "You don't have to go through this alone, even if it feels that way." Amber nodded. "I know." The examination itself was routine. Measurements, heartbeat, data points recorded with clinical precision. The sound of the baby's heartbeat filled the room, briefly steady, consistent, unaffected by anything beyond the immediate biological process. Amber listened without expression. It was not detachment. It was containment. Afterward, as she prepared to leave, Dr. Park handed her a printed sheet recommendations for managing stress resources contacts. Amber took it, folded it once, and placed it in her bag. "Take care of yourself," the doctor said. Amber met her gaze. "I will." Outside, the afternoon light had shifted into something softer, less direct. Amber walked to her car at the same measured pace she carried everywhere. Inside, she sat for a moment before starting the engine. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she looked at it immediately. A new message had arrived. Not from Reeves and Cole, from an unknown number. The preview displayed only a single line. "You deserve to know the truth." Amber did not open it. She locked the screen and placed the phone beside her. The engine started with a low, steady sound. On the drive home, traffic moved in predictable patterns. Stoplights, merging lanes, signals observed and followed without deviation. The structure of the road mirrored the structure Amber had been building in her own life. Controlled, documented, understood. When she arrived at the house, the driveway was empty. Aiden was not home. That too had become predictable. Inside the house carried the same stillness it always did in his absence. Amber set her bag down on the dining table, the folder of documents still resting where she had left it. Nothing had changed in its position. She moved past it without stopping. Upstairs, she changed into something more comfortable, then returned downstairs with her laptop. She sat in the same chair, opened the same folder on her screen. The timeline document had grown. Entries layered over one another, forming a structure that was no longer fragmented. Now she added another line. 0402. Medical confirmation elevated stress levels. No support at home. It was not emotional. It was factual. Amber paused her fingers, resting lightly on the keyboard. Then she created a new section. External communications under it. She listed Reeves and Cole, multiple emails, unopened, unknown number, message received. You deserve to know the truth. She did not assign meaning to the second message. Not yet. But she recorded it. The act of recording did not resolve uncertainty. It contained it. Later that evening, Aiden returned home. His arrival followed the same pattern, door-opening keys placed on the counter movement through the space without acknowledgement of what had been left behind. Amber remained seated. You were out today, he asked, noticing the absence without directly addressing it. I had an appointment, she said. With who, doctor? Aiden nodded as though the information required no further detail. Everything fine, he asked. Yes. Another pause. Did you make any progress on the documents, he continued? Amber closed her laptop. I'm still reviewing them, she said. Aiden's expression tightened slightly. It shouldn't take this long, he said. Amber met his gaze. I'm being thorough. He exhaled, the sound controlled but present. We don't have time for thorough, he replied. We need to move forward. Amber considered the statement. Then she nodded. I understand your position, she said. The phrasing was deliberate. It acknowledged his urgency without accepting it. Aiden looked at her for a moment longer, as though trying to assess something that remained just out of reach. Then he turned away. I'll be upstairs, he said. Amber watched him go. The distance between them was no longer defined by space. It was defined by information. Upstairs, Aiden moved through his routine with the same confidence he had maintained for weeks. Downstairs, Amber sat with a complete record of everything that had led them here. The email from Reeves and Cole remained unopened. The message from the unknown number remained unread. The documents on the table remained unsigned. But the system Amber had built was no longer passive. It was ready, and when she chose to act, it would not be in response to pressure. It would be in alignment with everything she already knew. Control, when it shifts, rarely announces itself through force. It settles quietly into behavior, into what is allowed, what is ignored, and what is no longer questioned. By the following week, Sophie Lang was no longer a pattern Amber Hayes needed to track. She was a presence. It began with small traces that no longer required interpretation. A silk scarf draped over the back of a chair that did not belong to Amber. A pair of heels left near the entryway, positioned as though they had been removed without concern for who might see them. A glass in the sink with a shade of lipstick Amber did not wear. None of it was hidden. That more than anything else defined the shift. Aiden Carter was no longer managing appearances. He was replacing them. Amber moved through the house as she always had, quietly without disruption, but the environment no longer responded to her in the same way. It had been restructured not physically but in intention. Spaces that had once been shared now carried a different weight. The living room where they had once sat together in the evenings now held conversations she was not part of. The kitchen, once neutral ground, had become a place where her presence felt peripheral. And the bedroom, Amber did not enter it anymore. That boundary had been established without discussion. The first time Aiden addressed it directly, his tone carried the same measured control he applied to everything else. "It's probably better if you take the guest room for now," he said one evening, standing in the hallway as though the decision had already been finalized. Amber looked at him, her expression unchanged. "For how long?" she asked. Aiden shrugged slightly. "Until things settle," he replied. The phrase carried no definition. Amber did not ask for one. She nodded once. "All right." There was no argument, no visible resistance. But later in her notebook, she wrote 0407, relocated to guest room. No discussion of duration. Implied displacement. She underlined the last two words once. Implied displacement. Sophie's presence expanded quickly after that. She did not move in officially. There were no declarations, no formal transitions. But her belongings multiplied. Her schedule overlapped with Aiden's in ways that no longer required explanation. Amber observed the rhythm. Morning coffee cups, two not one left on the counter. Voices in the living room before Amber had come downstairs. Laughter that carried through the walls, light and unrestrained. Amber did not interrupt. She adjusted her timing instead. She woke earlier, moved through the house before either of them had fully started their day, prepared her work in silence, then retreated to spaces where she would not be required to acknowledge what had become visible. The guest room became her center. It was smaller, less defined, but it offered something the rest of the house no longer did: control. From there, she continued her work. The timeline document had grown more detailed. Financial entries now aligned with behavioral shifts in near-perfect sequence. Withdrawals correlated with evenings Aiden was absent. Transfers connected to accounts she had already identified in the documents he had asked her to sign. Amber did not need to interpret the data. It spoke on its own. That afternoon, as she reviewed a set of bank statements, her phone vibrated again. The same unknown number. This time, the message was longer. "You're being cut out of more than you think. Check the secondary account ending in 4,821. It's not what he told you." Amber read the message once. Then again, her expression did not change. She opened her laptop and navigated to the account referenced. The number was familiar. It appeared in the documents Aiden had presented, listed as one of the accounts to be restructured under his sole control. At the time, it had seemed minor, one of several. Now Amber examined it more closely. Transaction history populated the screen. At first glance, it appeared consistent with business activity. Deposits, withdrawals, transfers labeled with internal references. But the pattern shifted when viewed over time. Smaller withdrawals spaced evenly across weeks. Transfers routed through intermediary accounts before consolidating elsewhere. Amounts structured just below thresholds that would trigger automatic reporting. Amber began to map the flow. Each transaction connected to another, forming a chain that did not align with standard business operations. This was not restructuring. This was extraction. She documented everything. Account 4,821 irregular withdrawal pattern. Structured to avoid detection. Cross-reference with doc_02_ account control. Her pen moved steadily. There was no urgency in the motion. only clarity. Downstairs, voices carried again. Aiden and Sophie. Amber paused, listening not to the words themselves, but to the tone. Relaxed, unguarded, as though the environment no longer required caution. She closed her laptop and stood. When she stepped into the hallway, the conversation below softened, then stopped entirely. Amber descended the stairs at the same measured pace she always used. Sophie stood in the kitchen, leaning lightly against the counter. Aiden was beside her, his posture casual, his expression neutralizing, as Amber entered the space. "Hey," he said, as though nothing required explanation. Amber acknowledged him with a slight nod. Sophie's gaze lingered for a moment longer than necessary, assessing, then settling into a polite smile. "Hi," she said. Amber did not return the smile. She moved to the refrigerator, retrieved a glass of water, and remained standing for a moment. No one spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was defined. Aiden broke it first. "We were just talking about a trip," he said. "A few days out of town." Amber turned slightly, her attention settling on him. When she asked, "Next week," he replied, "just to get away for a bit." Amber nodded once. "I see." There was no follow-up question, no request for details. Sophie shifted her weight slightly, as though expecting something more, a reaction perhaps. It did not come. Amber placed the glass in the sink. "I have work to finish," she said. Then she turned and walked back upstairs. Behind her, the conversation resumed, quieter this time. Amber returned to the guest room and closed the door. Inside, the space remained unchanged, predictable, contained. She sat at the desk and reopened her laptop. The account data remained on the screen, the message from the unknown number still visible above it. Amber did not respond. Not yet. But she added a new entry, 0409. External source confirms irregular activity. Account 4,821 flagged. Evidence consistent with internal findings. She paused, then added one more line. Sophie presence now continuous. No concealment. Amber leaned back slightly, her gaze moving across the room. There was no visible emotion in her expression, no anger, no fear, only understanding. Upstairs, the guest room door remained closed. Downstairs, Aiden and Sophie continued to move through a life they believed had already shifted in their favor. But the structure beneath that belief was no longer intact. Amber had seen it, documented it. And now, for the first time, she had confirmation from beyond her own observation. The system was no longer forming. It was complete enough to act. She closed her laptop. The room settled into silence again. And Amber remained exactly where she needed to be. The moment a boundary disappears, it is rarely replaced. It is simply crossed again and again until no one remembers where it once stood. Aiden Carter no longer pretended. By the time the week reached its end, Sophie Lang's presence in the house had moved beyond suggestion. She did not arrive with luggage. She did not ask permission. She simply stayed her belongings, expanding across surfaces, her routines overlapping with Aiden's, as though they had always existed that way. Amber Hayes did not interfere. She observed. That morning, the house carried the quiet signs of permanence. A second toothbrush in the bathroom Amber no longer used. Clothing folded on the chair in what had once been the shared bedroom. A pair of sunglasses left on the kitchen island, positioned without hesitation. Nothing was hidden. Aiden had stopped arranging his actions around explanation. There was no longer any attempt to maintain the structure of a marriage that existed only in name. Amber moved through the space with the same measured calm she had maintained from the beginning. She prepared her coffee, opened her laptop, reviewed documents, recorded entries. But the pattern had reached a point where observation alone no longer served a purpose. It had been mapped. That afternoon, Aiden entered the guest room without knocking. Amber looked up from her desk, her expression unchanged. "We need to talk," he said. The phrase carried a different weight now. Not an invitation, a declaration. Amber closed her notebook gently. "I'm listening," she replied. Aiden remained standing, his posture aligned with decision rather than discussion. "This isn't working," he said. "Not like this." Amber did not ask what he meant. He continued, "Sophie is staying here. That's not going to change." The statement was direct, clean, final. Amber held his gaze. "I understand," she said. Aiden's expression tightened slightly, as though expecting resistance that did not arrive. "I think it would be better if you found somewhere else to stay," he added. There it was, not suggestion, removal. Amber remained still for a moment, allowing the words to settle into the space between them. "For how long?" she asked. Aiden exhaled a controlled release. "Indefinitely," he said. The word did not carry hesitation. Amber nodded once. There was no visible reaction, no shift in posture, no raised voice. "All right," she said. The simplicity of the response created a brief disruption in Aiden's composure. It was subtle, but present an expectation unmet. "I'll give you a few days," he added, as though reasserting control. Amber did not respond to the timeline. Instead, she asked a different question. "The documents," she said. "Are they part of this?" Aiden's gaze sharpened slightly. "They're separate," he replied. "That's business." Amber held the silence for a fraction longer. Then she nodded again. "I see." The conversation ended there. Not because it was resolved, but because Aiden believed it was. He turned and left the room without waiting for further response. Amber remained seated. The door closed behind him with a soft, controlled sound. For several minutes, nothing moved. Then Amber reached for her notebook. Her pen hovered briefly above the page before she wrote, 0412 formal request to vacate residence. Indefinite. No negotiation offered. She underlined the phrase once. Then added, documents confirmed as separate leverage. The distinction mattered. Aiden was not removing her because of the documents. He was removing her while believing the documents would secure his position afterward. Amber closed the notebook. The structure had aligned. Everything now existed in parallel. The removal from the house, the transfer of assets, the financial irregularities, the external confirmation. Nothing remained isolated. That evening, Amber began to pack. Not everything. Only what was necessary. Clothing, personal documents, her notebooks, the laptop, a small collection of items that held no visible value but carried continuity. She moved through the process without urgency, each item selected with intention. Downstairs, voices continued, Aiden and Sophie, uninterrupted. At one point, laughter carried up the staircase, light, unrestrained, unburdened by anything that existed beyond the immediate moment. Amber paused briefly, not in reaction, in recognition. Then she continued. By nightfall, a single suitcase stood near the door of the guest room. Amber sat beside it, her hands resting lightly on her lap. The house felt different now, not because of what had changed, but because of what had been acknowledged. There was no longer any ambiguity, no space for interpretation, only action. Her phone lay on the desk, screen dark. The unread email from Reeves and Cole still waited. The message from the unknown number remained unanswered. Amber looked at the phone, then away. Timing still mattered. Later, as the house settled into quiet, Amber carried the suitcase downstairs. Aiden was in the living room, Sophie beside him. The television cast a soft glow across the space. reflecting off surfaces that had once felt familiar. Aiden looked up as Amber entered. "You're leaving tonight?" he asked. Amber set the suitcase near the door. "Yes," she said. There was no elaboration. Sophie remained seated, her expression unreadable. Aiden stood moving a few steps closer. "Where are you going?" he asked. Amber met his gaze. "I'll manage," she replied. The answer did not provide information. It closed the question. Aiden nodded slowly, as though accepting something he did not fully understand. "All right," he said. "That's probably for the best." Amber did not respond. She reached for the handle of the suitcase. There was a moment brief, almost imperceptible, where the space held something unspoken. Not regret, not hesitation, just the recognition of a line being crossed without return. Then Amber opened the door. The night air moved in, immediately cooler than the interior, sharper in contrast. She stepped outside without looking back. The door closed behind her with a soft, final sound. From inside, the house remained lit, occupied, active. From outside, it became something else. A structure she no longer needed to navigate. Amber walked down the driveway, the suitcase wheels moving steadily against the pavement. There were no witnesses this time. No neighbors at windows. No audience to mark the moment. Only the quiet shift of position. She reached her car, placed the suitcase in the trunk, and paused briefly before getting in. Her phone remained in her bag. The email still unopened. But now the conditions had changed. Amber was no longer inside the structure Aiden believed he controlled. She was outside it. And from that position, everything would look different. She started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness ahead, and without hesitation, Amber drove forward. Distance did not create clarity. It revealed what had already been clear once the noise was removed. Amber Hayes drove without urgency. The road stretched out in familiar lines, intersections appearing and resolving in predictable intervals. She did not choose a destination immediately. Instead, she allowed the movement itself to settle the shift that had already occurred. The house in Irvine no longer existed as a variable in her system. It had been closed. After nearly 20 minutes, Amber exited the main road and turned into a quieter residential area in Santa Ana. The apartment complex was modest two-story buildings arranged around a central courtyard, the kind of place designed for function rather than display. It was not unfamiliar. She had passed through it once before, months ago, when a former client had mentioned short-term leases available without extensive background checks. Amber parked near the far end of the lot. The engine fell silent. For a moment she remained seated, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. The transition from movement to stillness carried a different kind of weight. Not resistance, not uncertainty, just awareness. Then she reached for her bag. Inside, her phone lay where she had left it. Screen still dark, the unread notifications waiting without interruption. Amber stepped out of the car, retrieved her suitcase, and walked toward the building. The unit she had secured earlier that evening required no interaction. A digital code had been sent via text. Temporary, functional, sufficient. Inside, the apartment was clean, minimally furnished. A small kitchen, a narrow living area. One bedroom with neutral walls and a single window facing the courtyard. Amber placed her suitcase near the bed. There was no need to unpack immediately. She moved through the space, once noting exits, layout, light sources. Then she returned to the small table near the window and sat down. For the first time since the call from Michael Reeves, she reached for her phone with a specific intention. The email waited at the top of her inbox. Final notice, immediate attention needed. Amber opened it. The screen filled with text, structured, formal, precise. She read it slowly. "Dear Miss Hayes, This correspondence serves as formal notification that you have been designated the primary beneficiary in the estate of Richard Hayes. Amber's gaze did not shift. The name registered without visible reaction. The estate includes liquid assets, real property holdings, and a controlling equity position in Hayes Infrastructure Group. She continued reading. Estimated total value $180,000,000. The number existed on the screen as fact, not as impact. As the sole heir, you are required to confirm acceptance and authorize transfer procedures within the specified time frame. Amber read the document in full, then scrolled back to the beginning. Richard Hayes. The name was not unfamiliar. It had existed at the edges of her life, referenced rarely, never explained fully. A presence defined more by absence than connection. Her mother had spoken of him only once years ago in terms that suggested distance rather than detail. Amber had not pursued it. Now the structure of that absence had taken form. She opened the attached files, legal documents, asset breakdowns, corporate structures. Hayes Infrastructure Group. Amber recognized the name immediately, not from personal connection, but from industry awareness. A large firm, established, quietly influential in regional development contracts. She moved through the documents with increasing focus: ownership percentages, board composition, subsidiary networks. Then she saw it, a list of active contracts. One entry aligned with something she had already documented: Carter Development Solutions, Aiden's company. Amber paused, not in surprise, in confirmation. The connection was not direct, but it was present. Aiden's firm operated as a subcontractor within a larger network of projects partially funded or overseen by Hayes Infrastructure Group. The structure was layered, but the relationship existed. Amber leaned back slightly, her hands resting on the table. For a moment, she allowed the information to settle. Then she returned to the screen. A new message appeared at the bottom of the thread. Michael Reeves, Miss Hayes, we strongly advise scheduling a meeting at your earliest convenience. There are strategic considerations regarding your position that would benefit from immediate discussion. Amber read the message once. Then she opened a new tab and began to respond. Her reply was brief. Mr. Reeves, I am available tomorrow afternoon. Please confirm location and time. She sent it without revision. The action was simple, but it marked a transition. Amber closed the email and opened her timeline document. The structure she had built over the past weeks remained intact. Now she began to integrate the new information. 0412 estate confirmed. Primary beneficiary, Hayes Infrastructure Group controlling equity. She added another line. Connection, identified Carter Development Solutions, operates within Hayes Contract Network. The implications were clear, not speculative, structural. Amber did not interpret them beyond what the data supported. Instead, she created a new section, legal position. Under it, she listed full control potential via equity activation, indirect influence over subcontractor operations, including Aiden's firm. Timing of activation, critical. She paused, her pen hovering briefly. Then she added, no immediate disclosure. The decision aligned with everything she had done so far. Information once revealed could not be contained, but withheld, it could be positioned. Her phone vibrated again. A response from Reeves. Tomorrow, 2:00 p.m. Reeves and Cole West, Coast Office, Irvine. Amber read the message. Irvine, the same city she had just left. The proximity did not register as coincidence. She replied with a single line, confirmed. Then she set the phone down. The room remained quiet. Outside, the courtyard lights flickered on, casting soft illumination across the window. Amber stood and walked to the small kitchenette, filling a glass with water. The movement was routine, grounding. When she returned to the table, she did not reopen the email. She did not revisit the documents. Everything she needed had already been processed. Instead, she opened a new notebook. On the first page, she wrote, "Hayes Control Structure." Beneath it, she began outlining the corporate framework, mapping relationships between entities, identifying points of influence. Each line connected to another. Each connection reinforced the same conclusion. Amber's position had changed. Not emotionally, not visibly, but structurally, back in Irvine. Aiden Carter moved through his evening with the same confidence he had carried for weeks. The house remained occupied. The narrative, in his view, remained stable. He believed the removal had resolved the imbalance. He believed the documents would secure the rest. He did not know that the system he operated within had already shifted. Amber closed the notebook. The apartment around her remained simple, unchanged, but the space she occupied within the larger structure was no longer the same. She turned off the light and moved toward the bedroom. Tomorrow would not introduce new information. It would organize what already existed. And from that organization, decisions would follow, not in reaction, but in alignment. Power, when formalized, does not arrive as emotion. It arrives as structure defined, documented, and enforceable. Amber Hayes arrived at the Reeves & Cole West Coast office at exactly 1:57 p.m. The building stood in a quiet commercial district in Irvine, its glass exterior reflecting a sky that appeared almost too clear to hold anything unresolved. Inside the lobby was understated but precise marble floors, muted tones. A reception desk positioned to manage flow without drawing attention. Amber approached with the same measured pace she carried everywhere. "Amber Hayes," she said. The receptionist nodded, already expecting her. "Mr. Reeves is ready for you. No waiting." Amber followed the assistant down a corridor lined with closed doors. Each one carried a name, a title, a structure of authority that did not require explanation. At the end of the hall, a door opened into a conference room, defined by glass walls and controlled light. Michael Reeves stood as she entered. He was in his mid-40s, composed in a way that suggested experience rather than performance. His expression was neutral but attentive, not curious, prepared. "Miss Hayes," he said, extending his hand. Amber shook it briefly. "Thank you for coming." They sat across from each other at a polished table. Between them, a folder had already been placed. It was thicker than the one Aiden had presented days earlier, structured differently. "This will be a comprehensive overview," Reeves said. "We've prepared documentation to clarify your position and outline your options." Amber nodded. "I've reviewed the email," she said. Reeves inclined his head slightly. "Then we can proceed directly." He opened the folder. Inside were documents organized with clear divisions: estate transfer, corporate holdings, legal authority. Each section marked, tabbed, and referenced. "Richard Hayes passed 3 weeks ago," Reeves began. "As outlined in the will, you are the sole beneficiary of his estate. There are no competing claims." Amber listened without interruption. "The total valuation, as you've seen, is approximately $180 million, he continued. "That includes liquid assets, but more significantly, a controlling equity position in Hayes Infrastructure Group." He turned a page, sliding a document toward her. "This is the corporate structure." Amber studied it. Ownership percentages, board composition, voting rights. "You hold 51%, Reeves said. That constitutes full controlling interest." Amber's gaze remained steady. "And operational authority?" she asked. "Activated upon formal acceptance," Reeves replied. "At that point, you would have the legal capacity to influence or override board decisions, initiate audits, restructure leadership within the bounds of corporate law." Amber processed the information without visible reaction. Reeves continued. There are strategic considerations we should address immediately. He turned another page. A significant portion of Hayes Infrastructure's current operations involves layered subcontracting networks. One of those networks includes Carter Development Solutions. Amber did not look up. I've identified that connection, she said. Reeves paused briefly, then nodded. Then you understand the implication. I understand the structure, Amber replied. Reeves leaned back slightly, observing her. Your position places you in a unique situation, he said. You have both personal and corporate intersections with Mr. Carter's business. Amber met his gaze. I'm aware. There was no elaboration. Reeves did not press. Instead, he shifted the focus. The question now is timing, he said. You can activate your authority immediately, or you can delay allowing us to gather additional data before formalizing your position. Amber considered this. What would delay allow, she asked. Discretion, Reeves replied. Once your control is activated, it becomes part of the corporate record. That information will circulate. If there are actions you wish to take prior to that audit's investigations, it may be advantageous to proceed quietly. Amber nodded once. That aligns with my current approach. Reeves studied her for a moment. You've already begun collecting information, he said. It was not a question. Amber did not confirm directly. I have records, she said. Reeves accepted the answer. Then we should coordinate, he replied. Our legal team can support documentation, ensure admissibility, and structure any findings within a formal framework. Amber glanced at the documents again. What about personal liability, she asked. If irregularities are found within Carter Development Solutions, Reeves's response was immediate. Liability would depend on the nature of the findings, he said. However, based on preliminary indicators, any exposure would likely fall on operational leadership, Mr. Carter. Amber did not react. Understood, she said. Reeves closed the folder slightly, leaving it within reach. There is one more consideration, he added. Amber waited. The transfer of your personal assets, he said. We are aware that Mr. Carter has presented documents for restructuring. Amber's gaze shifted slightly. You've seen them, she asked. Not directly, Reeves replied. But the timing and nature of such requests are not uncommon in situations where one party anticipates a shift in financial control. Amber absorbed this without comment. If those documents have not been signed, Reeves continued, then no legal transfer has occurred. Your assets remain intact, Amber nodded. They haven't been signed. Reeves's expression remained neutral. Then your position is secure. The statement carried weight, not as reassurance, as fact. Amber leaned back slightly in her chair. The room remained quiet, the glass walls reflecting a controlled environment where nothing moved without intention. What would you recommend, she asked. Reeves considered the question carefully. Based on what we know he said, I would recommend a phased approach. Continue gathering information. Allow us to initiate a preliminary audit under standard corporate review protocols. Once sufficient evidence is established, we can activate your control and proceed with formal action. Amber processed the structure. It aligned with her own. Timeline, she asked. 2 to 3 weeks, Reeves replied. Depending on access. Amber nodded. That's acceptable. Reeves closed the folder fully. I'll have my team coordinate with you, he said. All communication will remain confidential. Amber stood. The meeting had reached its natural conclusion. Reeves stood as well. Miss Hayes, he said you are in a position of significant authority. How you choose to use it will define the outcome. Amber met his gaze. I understand. There was no emphasis in her tone, no declaration, only acknowledgement. She left the office the same way she had entered, without hesitation, without pause. Outside, the afternoon light remained unchanged. The city moved as it always did, unaware of the structural shift that had just been formalized within a single room. Amber walked to her car and sat inside for a moment before starting the engine. Her phone remained silent. No new messages, no interruptions. Everything that needed to be known had been clarified. Everything that needed to be done had been outlined. Back in the house she had left, Aiden Carter continued to operate within a system he believed he controlled. He did not know that the structure above him had already shifted. He did not know that the timing he believed was his had already been defined elsewhere. Amber started the engine. The car moved forward smoothly, merging into traffic without disruption. There was no urgency in her movement, no visible change. But the position she now occupied was no longer observational. It was operational. And from that position, the next steps would not require reaction. They would require execution. Evidence did not become powerful when it was discovered. It became powerful when it was organized. Amber Hayes returned to the Santa Ana apartment just before dusk. The light outside fading into a muted gray that softened the edges of everything it touched. Inside, the space remained unchanged quiet, contained sufficient. She placed her bag on the table and opened her laptop without pause. The meeting with Michael Reeves had not introduced uncertainty. It had confirmed structure. Now the work required precision. Amber opened the folder labeled Aiden Timeline. The document stretched across multiple pages, entries layered in chronological order, each one supported by images, receipts, or transaction records. What had once been a collection of observations had become a framework. Now she began to refine it. She created a new column, Source Verification. Each entry would now be cross-referenced not just by date and content, but by origin, personal observation, financial record, external confirmation. She moved through the document line by line. 0321. Physical evidence in vehicle. Female presence confirmed. Source personal observation plus photographic evidence. 03 or 18. Financial account transfer approx. $18,000. Source bank statement downloaded. 0409. External source confirms irregular activity. Account 4,821. Source anonymous message plus verified transaction pattern. Amber did not rush. Each entry was evaluated, categorized, reinforced. The goal was not volume, it was integrity. Her phone vibrated once. A new email from Reeves and Cole. She opened it immediately. Miss Hayes, our audit team has initiated a preliminary review under standard corporate compliance protocols. Initial access has been granted to internal financial records connected to Hayes Infrastructure subcontractors, including Carter Development Solutions. We will update you as findings are confirmed. Amber read the message once. Then she added a new section to her document, Legal Coordination. Under it, she wrote 0413 audit initiated via Reeves and Cole. Access confirmed. The system expanded, not outward, deeper. Later that evening, Amber accessed the financial portal she had used during her time advising Aiden's business. Her credentials still worked. That detail did not surprise her. Aiden had not considered her a risk. The interface loaded slowly, then resolved into familiar categories, accounts, transactions, reports. Amber navigated directly to the accounts she had already flagged. The transaction history appeared unchanged at first glance. But Amber adjusted the filter. Custom range, extended timeline. 3 months back, then 6. Patterns emerged more clearly over time. The withdrawals were not isolated. They were consistent, structured, each amount calculated to avoid immediate scrutiny. Each transfer routed through intermediary accounts before consolidating into a final destination. Amber traced one path fully, account 4,821. Intermediary account, external entity. The external entity carried a name she did not recognize. She recorded it, Entity Lang Strategic Consulting LLC. Amber paused. The name aligned too precisely to be incidental. She searched for the entity. Public records loaded. Formation date recent. Ownership, Sophie Lang. Amber did not react. She added another entry. 0413 funds routed to Lang Strategic Consulting LLC owned by Sophie Lang. The structure was now visible, not speculative, documented. She leaned back slightly, her hands resting on the keyboard. The connection between Aiden and Sophie had moved beyond personal. It was financial, integrated. Amber opened a new document, Flow Analysis. She began mapping the movement of funds visually. Nodes, arrows, timelines. Each transfer connected to another, forming a network that could be presented, not just described. Her pen moved steadily across the notebook beside her. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only construction. Downstairs in Irvine, Aiden Carter reviewed his own accounts with a different intention. He saw movement, but not structure. He saw balances, but not patterns. To him, the system remained functional, under control. He did not see the convergence. Back in Santa Ana, Amber continued. Her phone vibrated again. This time, a message. The same unknown number. You're getting close. Be careful, he's moving faster than you think. Amber read it once. Then she placed the phone face down. The message did not alter her pace. It confirmed it. She added one final entry for the day 0413 external warning received. No change in approach. Amber closed the laptop. The room settled into silence. Outside, the courtyard lights cast soft reflections against the window. She stood moving to the small kitchenette, filling a glass with water. The routine remained unchanged. That was intentional. Control was maintained through consistency. When she returned to the table, she did not reopen the documents. She did not revisit the evidence. Everything necessary had already been captured. Instead, she opened her notebook to a blank page. At the top, she wrote, Next phase. Beneath it, she listed finalize evidence structure, coordinate with legal team on audit findings, delay asset transfer activation, maintain non-disclosure. She paused, then added one more line, prepare for formal presentation. Amber closed the notebook. The plan was no longer forming. It existed. Upstairs in a different house, Aiden moved through his evening with the same confidence he had carried for weeks. Sophie beside him, the environment unchanged. He believed the removal had simplified the situation. He believed the documents would secure the rest. He did not know that every movement he made was now part of a system he no longer controlled. Amber turned off the light. The apartment fell into darkness, quiet and complete. Tomorrow would not require discovery, only continuation. And when the moment came to present what she had built, it would not rely on emotion. It would rely on structure. Pressure did not build all at once. It accumulated in quiet increments until the structure beneath it began to shift. By the second week, Carter Development Solutions was no longer operating with the same certainty. Amber Hayes did not need direct updates to see it. The indicators were already present. Delayed payments, adjusted timelines, subcontractors requesting clarification on invoices that had previously moved without issue. The kind of friction that did not announce a crisis, but signaled one forming. Amber sat at the small table in her Santa Ana apartment, reviewing a new set of documents Reeves and Cole had forwarded that morning. Preliminary audit summaries. Nothing final, but enough to confirm direction. She read each page carefully. Transaction discrepancies, unreported transfers, Inconsistencies between declared project costs and actual disbursements. Carter Development Solutions appeared repeatedly. Amber did not react. She annotated. Irregular allocation project code 7A. Discrepancy between subcontractor payment and reported expense. Repeated routing through external entity, Lang Strategic Consulting, LLC. Each note aligned with the structure she had already built. The audit was not introducing new information, it was validating it. Her phone vibrated once. A message from Michael Reeves. We need to proceed with the next phase. Call when available. Amber looked at the message, then at the documents in front of her. The timing had shifted. Not abruptly, but enough. She called. Reeves answered on the second ring. Miss Hayes, I've reviewed the summaries, Amber said. A brief pause. Then you understand the position, Reeves replied. I do. Another pause, this one more deliberate. We're approaching a threshold, he said. The evidence is sufficient to initiate a formal audit under your authority. But that requires activation. Amber considered the statement. Activation. Once executed, her position would no longer be contained. It would enter record. What changes immediately, she asked. Control, Reeves said. You would have the legal right to initiate internal review processes, freeze certain accounts if necessary, and require full disclosure from all subsidiary operations. Amber's gaze remained steady. And visibility. It becomes known, Reeves replied. Not publicly, but within the corporate structure. Mr. Carter would be notified through formal channels. Amber leaned back slightly in her chair. That was the point of transition. Observation would end. Action would begin. She looked at the document again. Lang Strategic Consulting, LLC, highlighted in multiple sections. Funds moving, patterns repeating. Aiden had not stopped. He had accelerated. Prepare the documents, Amber said. Reeves did not respond immediately. Then understood. We'll need your signature to formalize control. I'll have everything ready within the hour. Amber ended the call. The room remained quiet. No visible shift. But the structure had moved. She opened her notebook. On the page titled Next Phase, she drew a line through the third item. Delay asset transfer activation. Then wrote beneath it, Activate control. Her pen did not hesitate. She set the notebook aside and opened her email. A new message had already arrived. Reeves and Cole. Attached control authorization documents. Amber opened the file. The language was precise, legal, binding, acceptance of inheritance, activation of controlling equity, authorization to initiate corporate audit procedures. She read each page, not quickly, not slowly, exactly once. Then she signed. Digital confirmation. Time-stamped. Irreversible. Amber closed the document. The action did not feel significant in the moment, because the significance was not emotional. It was structural. Across the city within the internal systems of Hayes Infrastructure Group, a change registered, ownership status updated, control parameters adjusted, access privileges redefined. The system recognized a new authority, Amber Hayes. Back in Irvine, Aiden Carter did not see it immediately. He was in his office reviewing a set of invoices that no longer aligned with his expectations. Numbers had shifted, margins tighter, cash flow slower. He adjusted figures, recalculated projections, tried to identify the cause. But the system he was working within had already changed. Amber returned to her laptop. Within minutes, a new portal became accessible. Corporate-level access. Hayes Infrastructure Group. She entered. The interface was broader than anything she had used before. Layers of data, departments, contracts, financial streams. Amber navigated directly to the audit section. Requests had already been initiated. Her authorization had triggered them automatically. She reviewed the list. Internal audit active, financial review active, subsidiary compliance active, Carter Development Solutions flagged. Amber did not interact further. The process was already in motion. Her role was not to interfere. It was to allow structure to execute. Her phone vibrated again. A message. Unknown number. He just got a notice. "It's starting." Amber read it once, then placed the phone down. She did not respond. There was nothing to say. Back in Irvine, Aiden's phone buzzed on his desk. An email. Official. Subject line. Notice of Internal Audit Hayes Infrastructure Group. He opened it. Read the first line, then the second. His expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The message was clear. Audit procedures had been initiated. Full financial disclosure required, effective immediately. Aiden leaned back in his chair, reading the email again. The connection was not immediately obvious. But the timing, it did not align with anything he had planned. He reached for his phone, scrolling through recent messages, recent transactions, searching for something he might have missed, something he had overlooked. But the system did not reveal itself that way, not from inside it. Back in Santa Ana, Amber sat in stillness. The apartment remained quiet, unchanged. But the position she occupied had shifted completely. She was no longer documenting. She was no longer preparing. The structure she had built had been activated, and now it would move on its own. She opened her notebook one last time. Under next phase, she added, Audit initiated. Control active. Then she closed it. There was nothing more to write. Outside, the night settled over the courtyard. Inside, Amber remained exactly where she needed to be. And somewhere else, in a different room, Aiden Carter began to realize that the system he believed he controlled was no longer responding the way it once had. Control, once formalized, does not raise its voice. It issues notices. The first notice reached Aiden Carter at 9:12 a.m., marked with the insignia of Hayes Infrastructure Group, and routed through a compliance channel he had never had reason to question. It was followed within minutes by two more, one from internal audit, another from a legal liaison he did not recognize. The language was precise. Effective immediately. Carter Development Solutions is subject to a comprehensive internal audit under the authority of controlling equity. There were attachments, deadlines, a request for full disclosure of financial records across a defined period, a list of accounts to be reviewed. Among them, 4,821. Aiden read the notice twice, then a third time. He leaned back in his chair, scanning the page as though repetition might alter its meaning. It did not. The structure was clear. The authority behind it was unfamiliar. He checked the sender again. Legitimate. He opened the second notice. Failure to comply within the stated time frame may result in immediate suspension of contractual engagements and escalation to formal investigation. Aiden set the phone down, then picked it up again. His first instinct was to call his accountant. His second was to open the accounts himself. He chose the second. Numbers loaded. Balances that had once felt flexible now appeared constrained by flags he had never seen before. Pending reviews, temporary holds, a series of notations that limited movement without fully freezing it. He moved quickly, opening additional tabs, cross-checking recent transfers. The history was intact, but new markers appeared beside certain transactions, small symbols indicating review status. Aiden clicked one, flagged for irregular routing. He closed the window. For a moment he sat still, not frozen, calculating. Then he reached for his phone and dialed. Daniel Reeves, a voice answered. Aiden Carter, he said, his tone controlled. I just received an audit notice. I need to understand what this is. There was a brief pause. Mr. Carter, All inquiries should be directed through the compliance channel outlined in your notice, the voice replied. That's not helpful, Aiden said. I have active contracts. This disrupts operations. Compliance reviews are standard under controlling equity, the voice said. Your cooperation will ensure minimal disruption. Controlling equity. The phrase landed without context. Who authorized this? Aiden asked. I'm not at liberty to discuss internal governance, the voice replied. You have the information you need to proceed. The line went quiet. Aiden ended the call. He sat there, phone in hand, the structure of his morning rearranged without his consent. Downstairs, Sophie moved through the kitchen with the same ease she had carried for days, unaware of the shift taking place above her. The house remained unchanged. The surfaces, the light, the arrangement of objects, all intact. But the system beneath it had begun to move. Across the city, Amber Hayes sat in the conference room at Reeves & Cole, the same glass-walled space as before, but now arranged for a different purpose. Documents were laid out in structured sequence. Notebooks, printed timelines, screens displaying mapped financial flows. Michael Reeves stood at the head of the table reviewing the final alignment. We'll proceed in 3 stages, he said. Presentation of findings, confirmation of irregularities, formal action. Amber listened. Her role was not to speak, it was to confirm. A legal associate adjusted a set of documents aligning them with the timeline Amber had built. We've cross-referenced all transactions, the associate said. The routing through Lang Strategic Consulting is consistent across multiple projects. Amber nodded once. Include the formation records, she said. They're here, the associate replied, sliding a page forward. Registered entity sole owner Sophie Lang. Amber did not look at the name. She already knew it. Reeves turned to her. Once this is presented, there will be no ambiguity, he said. The outcome will follow the evidence. Amber met his gaze. That's the point. There was no emphasis, only alignment. Back in Irvine, Aiden moved through his office with increasing urgency. Files opened, closed, reopened. Calls placed unanswered returned with limited information. Every response directed him back to the same place. Compliance, disclosure, documentation. He opened the notice again. At the bottom, a line he had not fully processed before this audit is authorized under the direction of the controlling equity holder. Aiden stared at it. Controlling equity. Hayes Infrastructure. He had worked within their network for years, never questioning the structure above him. They were a source of contracts, not authority, in his day-to-day operations. But now, he opened a browser searching for recent corporate filings, any indication of a shift in ownership. Nothing public. Not yet. He leaned back again, this time slower. There was something he had missed. Not in the numbers, in the structure. He reached for his phone again, scrolling through recent messages, recent calls. Sophie's name appeared repeatedly. He opened their thread. Nothing unusual, just coordination, plans, a trip they had discussed but not yet taken. He closed it. Then he paused. Amber. He had not considered her in this context, not as a variable. But the timing, he stood. Downstairs, Sophie looked up as he entered the room. Everything okay, she asked. Aiden didn't answer immediately. When did you say that trip was? He asked instead. Sophie frowned slightly. Next week, she said. Why, Aiden nodded as though confirming something to himself. We might need to delay it, he said. Sophie's expression shifted. What's going on? Nothing, he said quickly. Just some business issues. He moved past her, already reaching for his keys. Where are you going? She asked. I need to handle something, he replied. The door closed behind him with more force than usual. Back at Reeves & Cole, the room settled into stillness as the final document was placed on the table. Reeves looked at Amber. Are you ready? He asked. Amber's gaze moved across the structure they had built. The timeline, the transactions, the connections, everything aligned. She nodded. Yes, there was no hesitation. Reeves turned to the associate. Proceed. The process moved forward, not quickly, not slowly, exactly as structured. In another part of the city, Aiden Carter drove without a clear destination, his mind moving through possibilities that did not yet connect. He had built his position on control, on understanding the system well enough to move within it without resistance. But now the system had shifted, and he did not know where the control point had moved. Back in the conference room, Amber remained seated, calm, still, observing. The evidence did not need interpretation. It needed presentation, and once presented, it would not argue. It would conclude. Consequences, when they arrive, do not argue. They proceed. The formal notice reached Aiden Carter before noon. It was not a call, not a warning, not an informal request for clarification. It was a document, delivered through the same compliance channel that had initiated the audit, structured with the same precision, the same absence of emotion. Preliminary findings confirm irregular financial activity within Carter Development Solutions, including undisclosed transfers, misallocation of project funds, and routing through unauthorized external entities. There were attachments, pages of summarized transactions, highlighted discrepancies. Account 4821 appeared repeatedly. So did the name of the external entity. Lang Strategic Consulting, LLC. Aiden read the document in full. Then again, each time the structure remained unchanged. At the bottom, a directive. Effective immediately, Carter Development Solutions is subject to operational review. Certain accounts are to be restricted pending further investigation. Aiden set the phone down slowly. The office around him remained the same, desk screens, files arranged in the order he had always maintained. But the system he relied on had shifted beyond his reach. He opened his banking interface again. Access remained, but movement did not. Certain transactions now required authorization he did not have. Others were marked for review. The flow had been interrupted, not completely, just enough. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, hands clasped together. For the first time, the situation did not align with a solution he could execute immediately. It required something else. Understanding. Across the city, Amber Hayes stood by the window of the conference room, looking out over a skyline that did not reflect what had just been set in motion. Behind her, the legal team moved through final confirmations. Documents printed, files secured, communication channels prepared for the next phase. Michael Reeves approached, stopping at a distance that acknowledged both proximity and separation. "It's done," he said. Amber did not turn immediately. She remained where she was, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. "What happens next?" she asked. "Formal proceedings," Reeves replied. "The audit transitions into investigation. If the findings hold, and they will, there will be legal consequences." Amber nodded slightly. "And operationally?" she asked. "His company will lose access to active contracts," Reeves said. "Without that, it won't sustain itself." Amber absorbed the information, not as outcome, as structure, Reeves continued. "There's also the matter of your personal assets," he added. "We've prepared a response regarding the documents he presented." Amber turned, then her attention settling on the folder Reeves held. "What response?" she asked. "A formal rejection," Reeves said, "with documentation outlining the attempted transfer and its implications." Amber took the folder. Inside, the language mirrored the precision of everything else, clear, unambiguous, legally grounded. She read it once, then closed it. "Send it," she said. Reeves nodded. "It will be delivered through legal counsel." Amber returned the folder to the table. The process continued, not driven by her, but aligned with her. Back in Irvine, Sophie Lang stood in the living room, her phone in her hand, the screen displaying a message she had read multiple times. The same notice, the same language, her name not in accusation, but in reference. Lang Strategic Consulting, LLC, her company, her structure, connected. She looked up as the front door opened. Aiden entered, his expression controlled but altered. "What is this?" she asked, holding up the phone. Aiden did not answer immediately. He moved past her, setting his keys down with more force than necessary. "It's an audit," he said. "That's not what I mean," Sophie replied. "My company is in this." Aiden turned to face her. "Then we need to figure out why," he said. Sophie's gaze held his. "You routed funds through it," she said. It was not a question. Aiden did not respond. The silence between them shifted, not into conflict, into recognition. "You said it was structured," Sophie continued. "You said it was clean." It is Aiden said the words sharper now. Or it was. Sophie lowered the phone slightly. "What changed?" she asked. Aiden exhaled, the sound controlled but present. "I don't know," he said. But the answer did not hold, not completely. There was something beneath it, something he had not yet named. Amber. The thought entered without invitation. He had not connected her to this. Not structurally, not until now. She left, Sophie said, as though filling the space. Aiden's gaze shifted when he asked. 2 nights ago, Sophie replied. "You told her to." Aiden nodded slowly. The timeline aligned. Not fully, but enough. Back in Santa Ana, Amber sat at the small table, her laptop open, the corporate interface still active. Updates had begun to appear. Audit status escalated. Compliance review expanded. Carter Development Solutions restricted. She did not interact with the system. She observed. The structure was executing. Her role had shifted again, from activation to oversight. Her phone vibrated. A message from Reeves. Legal notice delivered. Amber read it once, then set the phone aside. There was nothing more to initiate. Everything that followed would move through channels already established. She opened her notebook. The page titled Next Phase remained in front of her. She added one final line. Proceedings active. Then she closed it. The apartment remained quiet, unchanged. Back in Irvine, the house no longer held the same structure it had days before. Aiden stood in the center of it, the space around him unchanged, but no longer aligned with control. Sophie remained nearby, her presence no longer integrated, but separate. The system that had connected them had shifted. Not through confrontation, through process. Aiden picked up his phone again, scrolling through contacts, messages, searching for something that would reestablish position. But the system did not respond to search. It responded to structure. And the structure had already been defined. He looked up the room around him, steady, unchanged, but the position within it, that had moved. Far beyond the walls of the house. Outcomes when they settle do not announce victory. They restore order. The hospital room was bright in a way that removed all shadows. Amber Hayes lay propped against a set of pillows, the thin fabric of the hospital gown gathered neatly at her shoulders, her posture composed despite the quiet strain that still lingered in her body. The room carried the sterile clarity of a place designed for beginnings, monitors, steady surfaces, clean movement controlled. In her arms, the child slept. There was no urgency in the moment. No noise beyond the soft rhythm of breath, the distant movement of staff in the corridor, the occasional quiet exchange that passed without interruption. Amber did not speak. She observed, the same way she always had. But the structure around her was different now, contained, resolved. A nurse entered briefly, checking vitals, adjusting the blanket, offering a small professional smile that required nothing in return. "Everything looks good," she said. Amber nodded once. Thank you. The nurse left as quietly as she had arrived. The room returned to stillness. Amber adjusted her hold slightly, her gaze lowering to the child in her arms. There was no visible shift in her expression, no overt display of emotion. Only attention, the kind that did not require translation. On the small table beside her bed, her phone rested face down. It had been active earlier, messages, confirmations, updates, moving through the channels she had already set in motion. Now it remained silent. There was nothing left to initiate. Across the city, in a courtroom defined by order rather than spectacle, proceedings continued without her presence. Documents presented. Findings confirmed. Language precise. Aiden Carter sat at the far end of the room, his posture still, his expression controlled in the way it had always been, but now aligned with something different. Not control, containment. The evidence had not required interpretation. It had been structured, transactions mapped, accounts traced, entities connected. The flow of funds through Lang Strategic Consulting, LLC, had been presented alongside the internal discrepancies within Carter Development Solutions, each piece aligned with the next, forming a sequence that did not rely on argument. Only confirmation. Aiden had responded where required, answered questions, provided statements. But the system he now moved within did not respond to positioning. It responded to structure, and the structure had already been defined. Outside the courtroom, Sophie Lang stood alone. Her phone in her hand, the screen dark. The entity that had once carried her name as a point of expansion had been reduced to something else. A line in a document. A reference point. No longer a position. She did not attempt to enter the room. There was nothing inside that would alter what had already been established. Back in the hospital, Amber remained where she was. The light had shifted slightly, afternoon moving toward evening, but the room retained its clarity. She reached for her phone, not quickly, not with urgency. She turned it over. The screen illuminated. Messages appeared in quiet succession. Michael Reeves. Proceedings concluded. Findings upheld. Carter Development Solutions subject to full dissolution under compliance order. Another message. All personal assets secured. No exposure on your end. Amber read both, then set the phone down again. There was no visible reaction. The outcome had followed the structure. Nothing more, nothing less. The door opened softly. Dr. Elena Park stepped inside her presence, measured, consistent. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Amber considered the question. "Stable," she said. The doctor nodded, reviewing the chart briefly before looking up again. "You'll be able to go home tomorrow," she said. "Everything looks good." Amber acknowledged the information with a slight nod. "Thank you." Dr. Park paused for a moment longer, her gaze moving briefly to the child, then back to Amber. "You've done well," she said. Amber did not respond immediately. Then I followed the process. The doctor held her gaze for a second longer, as though recognizing something beyond the words. Then she nodded and left. The room returned to stillness. Amber shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket, ensuring the child remained comfortable. Her movements were precise, unhurried. There was no one else in the room. No witnesses, no audience. Only the outcome. Later that evening, Amber opened her notebook. The same one she had carried through every stage. The pages filled with entries, dates, observations, confirmations, structures. She turned to the final page. At the top, she wrote, "Conclusion." Beneath it, she added, "Structure held. Process completed. No further action required." She paused, then added one final line, "Move forward." Amber closed the notebook. The act was quiet, final. The past remained documented, contained, no longer active. Outside, the city moved through its evening without awareness of what had concluded within it. Contracts shifted, companies dissolved, structures adjusted, all without spectacle. Amber remained seated, the child still in her arms. There was no need to revisit what had happened. No need to return to the house in Irvine. No need to address what had already been resolved. The system had moved. She had aligned with it. And now, she stepped beyond it. The next morning, Amber left the hospital with a single bag and a child in her arms. No entourage, no display, just movement. The car waited where it had been parked. The road ahead remained clear. She placed the child carefully into the back seat, secured everything with the same attention she applied to all things. Then she got in. The engine started. The city opened in front of her. Amber did not look back. There was nothing behind her that required it. She drove forward, not quickly, not slowly, exactly as intended. In the end, nothing about Amber Hayes' story asked for attention. There were no raised voices to mark the turning point, no dramatic declarations to signal justice, no visible triumph to frame the outcome as victory. What remained was quieter than that. It was the record of a woman who chose to observe before reacting, who allowed time to reveal structure instead of forcing resolution, who understood that power, when used with precision, does not need to be displayed to be effective. Amber never argued her position. She built it. Every note she wrote, every document she saved, every moment she chose not to interrupt each one, became part of a system that would eventually speak on its own. Not through emotion, but through clarity. And when that system moved, it did not ask for permission. It followed process. There is something in that worth considering. In a world that often rewards immediacy, where responses are expected before understanding is complete, Amber's story moves differently. It reminds us that silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is preparation. Sometimes it is control. If you've stayed with this story until the end, you've already seen what happens when patience meets structure, when observation becomes action at the right moment, when dignity is maintained even in the face of removal. If this story resonates with you, you're not alone. Take a moment to share where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Stories travel across places and moments, and it's always grounding to see how far they reach. And if you find value in stories like this, stories that move quietly but leave a lasting impact, consider staying connected. Not for the spectacle, but for the clarity they offer. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that don't need to raise their voice to be heard.